Good afternoon to you on the East Coast, and good morning to you on the West. It is a very eventful day in Washington, which is not exactly news in and of itself. It's also National Cookie Day, so that's a thing. And so on today's show, we're going to be talking about COVID-19 and its aspect in the transition to a new administration. So, kind of a lot to get there. Obviously, David Schuster of Quick Hits News is going to be joining us to discuss in a bit. I just want to get to the facts and figures about where COVID-19 currently stands. Right now, more than 276,000 people have died from this virus. This is according to Johns Hopkins University, of course, who is that COVID-19 death count. Just to put that in a little bit of context, that's the equivalent population of Durham, North Carolina. So, just imagine an entire city of mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, colleagues, friends just gone. It's really helpful to kind of put it in that context here. There's been some developments in the last couple days and hours about what's going on with COVID relief, as well as the transition. So I definitely want to talk about that. David Schuster is joining me now. David, thank you so much.
Andy, it's an absolute pleasure to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
Again, thank you for coming on. So the COVID-19 pandemic, we have some news in the last couple days about Dr. Fauci. He's accepted a job within the incoming Biden administration. This has been kind of a challenge, making sure that the transition obviously is seamless in terms of especially COVID-19 relief. Do you think this is a significant enough move, in your opinion, to start moving in the proper direction here?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, there's several moving pieces in terms of the news. You identified how, more than 270,000. Robert Redfield from the CDC, the director, said that we're going to get another 200,000 deaths over the next 2.5 months. And so that's like 3,000 deaths a day, which is like imagining the death toll from 9/11 every day for the next 60 days. I mean, that's how terrible this winter is going to be. And we had Fauci saying this morning on the Today Show that, in fact, we haven't even seen the Thanksgiving spike yet, and we're already setting records. So at a time when everybody is so jittery and so anxious, and the president seems to be missing in action, the president simply focused on his relitigating the election. Clearly, a lot of people are looking at the Biden administration wondering, okay, what is he going to do? How is he going to reassure people? And I think it is a very reassuring, at least sort of emotional thing for the Biden administration to say Dr. Fauci is going to be a top medical advisor, that there's going to be this transition that involves him. I thought it was also significant that in an interview last night, there was Joe Biden saying that he's going to ask Americans to wear masks, every American to wear masks for the first 100 days of his administration. Again, making the point, he's not going to be forcing it, but asking everybody to do something for the greater good, to help your neighbors, to help your community. And I think every time you see the Biden transition taking some sort of action, it may not do anything immediately in terms of stopping the horrible numbers that we're facing now and that we're going to face for the next couple of months. But I think at least on an emotional level, it certainly reassures a lot of people.
But one of the concerns I do have about that is obviously the backlash from these anti-masker people, that no matter really what they're told here, whether they should wear masks, they kind of in defiance do the opposite. So what I'm concerned is and I guess this is still going to be really an open question, is the mask mandate going to help as much as it absolutely needs to?
It's a good question. And I think part of the responsibility on this is going to depend on, unfortunately, President Trump. If President Trump were to come out and to tell everybody, look, we're getting to the worst numbers now we've seen, you got to wear masks, try to take some precautions. If the president were to do that and to show some empathy, I think it would have an impact. I mean, he got 71 million votes. So clearly, with everything that's happened in this very unusual presidency, he has people who will believe him no matter what. I think if the president comes out and says, you got to wear masks, be socially distant, we got to be in this together. If he were to take that step and he were to take the step to say, and oh, by the way, I'm going to be the first person to take the vaccine. Never mind those former presidents. I'm going to do it to reassure people that it's safe. Not only would you, I think, convince a lot of the anti-maskers, you would also, I think, go a long way to convincing those 40% of the public who don't believe in vaccines. And so I think there's, we're waiting to hear from the president on that as well. There's a lot he could still do despite all the damage that people might think he has done so far.
Now, there is obviously a huge silver lining to this that we're seeing. Obviously, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo earlier this week said that 170,000 New Yorkers could have a vaccine by December 15th, which is only days away. That's huge. But it is worth reminding, obviously we have a light at the end of the tunnel here, but we still are in the tunnel of sorts. So, it's kind of worth pointing out. Do you think that is, clouding judgment of some leaders in Washington who kind of are thinking, we're past this at some level?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think to a certain extent, everybody's happy to know that there is this light at the end of the tunnel. And if you ask, for example, healthcare workers or people who are on the front lines, and again, there's still some open questions about how effective the vaccines will be. You're going to need 2 shots. Will the vaccine keep you protecting for how long? And yet you talk to healthcare workers and they'll say they would be the first to take, they would take the vaccine yesterday if it were available. That's how desperate they are. So I think there is a couple of things. I think you have people in Washington who, yes, it's good news that the vaccine is coming, and it certainly is an emotional lift. But I think everybody's very realistic about just how terrible things are right now. And again, there was just, there's just the story about in terms of vaccine distribution, Pfizer's having some supply chain problems. So they're not going to be able to roll out as many vaccines as quickly as they had hoped. And I think we're going to see more of those problems. So great if you're one of the first 170,000 New Yorkers. I would love to be one of those, although I probably won't qualify. But I mean, I think we have a long way to go. So it's going to be a combination good news and bad news, I think, for the next couple of months.
A question that I have, and I don't think, either of us can really answer this, is what about for the people who had COVID-19, now have a weakened immune system, but don't have the antibodies anymore? There's all these, and I'm speaking for myself as well. How does that play into the effectiveness or maybe potency of the vaccine, and whether getting the people who kind of fit in that category, are really, the vaccine is going to help as much as it would be for someone who didn't get it? That's frankly, a huge question of mine. I don't know about you, but.
Well, as for all my friends who like to call me Dr. Schuster, and I'm honored by that, and I'm really not a doctor, nor do I even have a PhD. This is getting into territory where I'm not an expert. I think from what I've read, yes, I think people who have already had COVID-19 may not necessarily need the vaccine. Maybe it's not a good idea. But you raise a very important point, and that is, as part of this vaccine rollout, everybody's going to need to get more information, clear, transparent information they can rely upon to make judgments about, okay, how quickly do I need to get the vaccine? Should I be at the front of the line? Should I be at the back of the line? What about if I have pre-existing conditions? What about if I have a suppressed immune system? All of those things. And so it's incumbent not just to sort of roll out the vaccine, but it's incumbent, I think, on public health officials, the Trump administration right now, the Biden administration in January, to do this massive education campaign so that all of us get these very questions answered and can have some confidence in the entire system and the process. It's not just about distributing the vaccine, making sure we have supply chains, but it's also about educating so many people, a large segment of the population who may not believe what the government's going to tell them.
Well, so, we've kind of, we've discussed the science and the rollout of the vaccine here, but some of the other big news, actually, that was Nancy Pelosi had a press conference earlier today talking about some ramping up about discussions about the stimulus. This is a topic that we've seen raised over and over and over, and there's a beacon of hope, and then nothing happens. What's going to happen now? Is there any possibility that something could happen?
It's going to depend on Mitch McConnell. It'll depend on Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, and whether he's going to play loosey with the football again and yank it away at the last second. I mean, you think about it. Initially, the Democrats wanted $3 trillion. Then they were willing to go down to $2 trillion. McConnell said no. Now they're down to whatever, $800 billion. I mean, it's not a great look for the Democrats when you think about Nancy Pelosi probably could have had a lot more if she would have agreed. She would have had a lot more if she had agreed to the deal that Republicans were offering before the election. She gambled and she lost because Democrats lost seats in the House, may pick up a few seats in the Senate. So that's a problem for Democrats. But again, I think in terms of the problem for the country and getting this relief out, this really does belong to Mitch McConnell. If Mitch McConnell wants to get this deal done, it'll get done. If he doesn't, then he won't. And I sort of wonder if he's going to wait and see how things play out in the Georgia Senate races, which would be unfortunate to politicize this because so many people, look, you've got tens of millions of people who are going to lose their benefits at the end of December, right? The benefits that they started getting in the spring that Congress passed, those go away if Congress doesn't continue them. So, I mean, people are up against the wall with this. And I just hope that one way or the other, there's some clarity from Mitch McConnell, the Republicans and the Democrats, frankly, whether they can get this deal, get it done now, so that you've got time to get the checks out and to help people.
I mean, another thought on, I mean, obviously, yeah, you touched on the Georgia Senate, the race in Georgia right now. One of my concerns is that that's going to also be a stalling point. That Mitch McConnell is going to say, you know what, let's see what the outcome what happens in Georgia. We shouldn't wait. We shouldn't do this until we know what the Senate is going to look like moving forward. That's frankly.
Yeah, it's possible. I have a feeling, though, based on talking to some folks in Washington and the way this is sort of cutting politically, I have a feeling that this is hurting the Republicans, that President Trump is hurting the Republicans with relitigating the races. We've seen some poll numbers that show that both Perdue and Loeffler, the two incumbent Republicans, are slightly behind. I also think that to the extent that negotiations continue to drag out and Congress is not able to come up with some sort of stimulus package relief bill, that will also cut against David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler. So maybe just in terms of pure political calculations, I'm sure there are Republicans who are telling McConnell, look, you help the case for these Georgia Republicans if you can get the stimulus bill done now. Don't wait until January 5th.
I mean, one of the things that I've also thought about is if they're going to do something, it's going to be at the last moment possible. It's going to be December 30th, or right before New Year's Eve. Kind of actually passing something right before the CARES Act is set to frankly expire. What's your take on this? In the status of eviction and the eviction moratorium, because different states obviously have very different requirements of kind of kicking someone out of their apartment. Some states you can give a week, and some states it's almost a year-long process, like in New York State. What's your take here?
Look, this is another one of these issues that I mean, it's for all the intentions that various states had, including New York, to try to keep people from being evicted, the fact of the matter is there's still a number of landlords who are still trying to, press on people's lack of information, and people don't know what their necessarily rights are, what's been passed by the various laws over the past year, and are still forcing people out. And I think that's one of the larger problems that we have, is that it's not good enough right now for a lot of states to pass these laws and say you can't evict people, because there's still a lot of unscrupulous landlords who are out there. I think it gets back to yet another sort of public education campaign that the states, unfortunately, have to do themselves, because there's this patchwork. The president has essentially left it up to states. There hasn't been any real clear national guidance or protocols that the states have been offered by the federal government. So you have a patchwork of laws state by state, and then it really comes up to sort of local news stations, local newspapers to try to explain it. And I think a lot of people are lost. I mean, a lot of people that I know who are in New York who are facing problems financially, and they're not exactly, they're turning to me and saying, hey, what is the law? What are my rights? And you know what? There's got to be some way we can do a better job of educating people about what your rights are. And as a result, when people sort of know, okay, if something is about to lapse, if it's an eviction protection in New York that's going to lapse by the end of the year or may not lapse, there's got to be some better way of transmitting that information to people so that people have an idea of what protects them and what doesn't.
That is that's a good point. And some of these, numbers really have been very staggering of unemployment. I saw that in LA County, that earlier in the pandemic, there was kind of a 60% unemployment rate, just LA County proper. not for full-time employment. So a lot of the part-time stuff was kind of not as bad. So I mean, you still have a lot of those situations, even though there are restaurants coming back. There's people are really doing their their civic duty to order takeout, and things like that. But that's obviously not enough.
Right. And it's, I mean, LA is facing, I mean, what I think, the mayor of LA and California Governor Newsom, I mean, they're essentially ordering the state to, shut down again, right? Because California is having the worst number of cases that it's had since the pandemic began. So California is again ordering playgrounds to be closed, telling people, no indoor dining, businesses are being shut down. And so I mean, everybody's trying to scramble to figure out, well, how can we contain this thing? And again, with the numbers getting as bad as they are, and yet everybody's tired. Everybody's tired of staying in, of being locked down. So it's almost impossible if you're a local government or state government to essentially shut down your entire state. But how do you convince people, okay, but this is serious again, because it's going to be a while before we get the vaccine, and we're seeing, record infection rates. And by all accounts, I mean, the virus is spreading faster now than it was back in the spring. The difference is that it may not be quite as deadly, or their ability to deal with it in hospitals and whatnot has changed, and people are having better outcomes. But it's a challenge. And one of the other things that the story that's jumped out to me today is the number of hospitals that are talking about how admissions now are dropping. And the reason they're dropping is not because there are fewer COVID cases, but the threshold in terms of being actually getting into a hospital is now higher. You have to present a more serious, deadly set of circumstances in order to get a bed when the beds are limited and the ICU is already full. And so you have a lot of people, it's heart attack or cancer or diabetes or other issues that might normally go to the hospital. There's no place for them. So our entire public health system is under incredible stress. And again, you have local and state officials who are trying to impress upon the public, look, you don't want to be in a situation where you need hospital care right now for COVID or anything else, because our system is overwhelmed. And the only way you can protect yourself is to stay away from people, keep social distance, keep your masks on. If you're going to order food, have it delivered or pick it up, and again, be very safe about that transmission. But these are frightening times.
I do want to, point out a few things. And, I've been covering this personally. I wrote a story a couple weeks ago for Ozzy that really raised some optimism. And I just want to really point this out for viewers: is that therapeutics are getting better. Doctors know how to treat this. There is a drug that's being developed really by a few different pharmaceutical companies. A drug that's similar to like Theraflu. You identify that you have COVID-19 early. You get this. It's something that knocks you off your feet for a week or two, but it's not something that could potentially kill you. That's a game changer. The monoclonal antibody treatments, those are game changers. It's a matter of, honestly, like a lot of this is frankly, and I'm talking about, really not in the context of talking to a lot of medical experts over the course of some of my reporting, specifically for Ozzy, not to plug there. But, a part of it is really identifying some of these problems up front and doing that early and recognizing your symptoms and saying, what, I'm feeling a little sick. I'm going to, quarantine, and I'm going to make sure that since I identified these things early, I'm going to ask about what these kind of treatments look like. They're incredibly important also because, it helps doctors be less overwhelmed in emergency rooms, not have to be making those decisions of who has a better outcome of, living through this and prioritizing their healthcare, which unfortunately you really shouldn't have to get to that point.
Right. And part of, one of the great things about the advances in medical treatment now is that, the whole point of lockdowns and social distance isn't that we're going to necessarily be able to stop everybody or even most people from getting it. But if you can spread out the infections so that infections don't all come at once, but they come spread out, then you've got a better chance if you go to a hospital that the hospital has the resources, the doctors and the staff to do it. By the steps that people have taken so far who are only now getting COVID-19, well, you have 8 months of medical research and practical information to sort of help you in terms of your treatment. So people who do get COVID-19 now have a better chance than people who got it back in March and April. But again, there comes a certain point where, again, when hospitals get overwhelmed and the ICUs are so jammed that the doctors have to start making some really difficult decisions. That's what we all want to try to avoid. And that's why, to the extent that people can socially distance, wear a mask, protect yourself, you don't want to go to a hospital now when it's crowded. You don't want to go to a hospital 2 weeks from now if it's even more crowded. If there's some way you can avoid getting this for a while, I mean, everybody, I think, at a certain point should be prepared that they may get this. But the whole point is that if we can sort of spread this out so that all of us have a decent chance to let the medical authorities and doctors and staff be able to help us.
I intended to talk more about the transition, but spent the majority of time talking about COVID. But obviously, very important topic. While I have you, have a new company and program of your own that you've been kind of working on and developing. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so since the spring, we have this thing called Quick Hits News. It's basically a group of network veteran journalists. We get together each day, talk about what stories we think are the most interesting, and then 4 or 5 of us get together in a 15 to 18-minute show, and we trade reporting, and we sort of go around the horn and talk about, well, here's this big story, then there's this big story. We react to each other's reporting. We provide some context. I'll tee up a couple stories that maybe the gang doesn't necessarily want to talk about themselves and get everybody's reaction. It's a good way to stay on top of the top U.S. and international stories, again, in 15 minutes. It's not just COVID. It's not just transitions or politics. There's stories from all over the world, and so it's kind of like CNN 20 years ago. You could watch for half an hour. You get caught up to date on everything going on across the United States and around the world. We do the same, except we all talk fast, and so we do it in 15 to 18 minutes. We don't waste anybody's time. We get right to the point, and we got people who are really good at being succinct and sort of finding the news and explaining here's why it matters. And we do it in this sort of live conversation, which is, I think, the way people like to watch TV these days, as opposed to these very dry tape spots. So in any case, quickhitsnews.com. You can find us on Twitter, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, Periscope, all the rest, Facebook. And we encourage everybody to subscribe, to join us. And Andy, it's good of you to have me on your show here on HAPS. Always love the HAPS app, and great to be on with you today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate it.
You got it.